the bill to be vetoed. The lady from Surrey, Representative Stevens, is recognized to debate the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members of the House, as I said the first time this was before us, that this is a mainstream approach. There has been a very active misinformation campaign by Governor Cooper and some of the media. More mainstream media has even called out Governor Cooper and challenged him on his representations of this bill. I want to cover some of the myths that have been perpetuated by this bill. Governor Cooper has said this bill is an effective ban on access to abortion in North Carolina. That is not true. This is no ban. Senate Bill 20 limits elective abortion after 12 weeks and provides important exceptions. Another myth is that Senate Bill 20 requires 4 in-person doctor visits for a medical abortion. This bill does not say that the physicians must give abortion-inducing drugs in person. The physician must be physically present when the first drug or chemical is administered, and that occurs on the first treatment visit, which is visit number 2. Visit number 2 is the final required visits. There are no requirement of 4 visits. An additional myth, Senate Bill 20 effectively prevents medical abortions for women after 10 weeks, not 12. Senate Bill 20 actually just states that a physician will verify that the gestational age of the baby is under 10 weeks. In line with the FDA recommendations, medical abortions, abortions by medication, are only acceptable through 10 weeks. Another big myth, this I found very interesting, that the GOP supermajority would override Cooper's veto, and it's just the result of political gerrymandering. Don't you find that laughable? Weren't most of you present when we passed replacement district boundaries for this very chamber? By a vote of 115 to 5, we all approved those maps. And those maps were also cleared by the then Democratic Supreme Court. Governor Cooper also said they've tried to paint this as a reasonable 12-week ban, but it's not. Senate Bill 20 is a mainstream approach to limiting elective abortions from the 2nd and 3rd trimester. Another myth, Senate Bill 20 restricts treatment for miscarriages, and that is in no way true. Senate Bill 20 expressly states that miscarriage treatment is not an abortion and is therefore not subject to the regulation of this bill. The things in this bill are not obstacles to abortion. They're safeguards. We seek to balance protecting unborn babies while ensuring the safe care of mothers. Please join us in this veto override.
For what purposes, the lady from Mecklenburg, Representative Bud Rice.
To speak to the bill.
Lady is recognized to debate the bill.
Thank you. There's been a lot of debate about the 4 corners of Senate Bill 20, the lack of transparency, the absence of consultation with the Democrats, and manipulation of the rules to get where we are this evening. But what's not been acknowledged is the history of women seeking abortions before 1973 and what that looked like. Cook County Hospital in Chicago in 1972 had a 40-bed ward devoted solely to septic abortion care. 40 beds. The hospital in Matthews is expanding its capacity by 50 beds. That's 30% of that hospital. That's in 2023. 40 beds in 1972, that's enormous. And deaths on that ward were not uncommon. The history of abortion underscores the reality that this procedure has always been with us, whether we like it or not, and whether or not it's legal. It will continue to be here, because abortion that is elective is because of an unintended pregnancy. Before 1973, thousands of women died because they did not have access to safe, sanitary health care for abortion procedures. They died by knitting needles. They died by coat hangers. They died by throwing themselves down the steps, hoping to cause a miscarriage. They died by ingesting lye soap and other poisons. They were desperate to terminate an unintended and unwanted pregnancy. They did it behind closed doors, on kitchen tables, They trusted quacks who said they were doctors when they were not. And if they didn't die as a result of a botched abortion, they had an extremely high likelihood of suffering chronic pain and illness for the rest of their life, being sterilized, or dying in a subsequent pregnancy because of the uterus having been punctured earlier. If a woman is too poor, if she's too young, and if she's too far away from health care, she will resort to clandestine measures to get what it is that she is seeking to achieve, an abortion. Desperation has no boundaries. And when it has no boundaries, people die needlessly. They suffer needlessly. And if you think the day of coat hangers has passed, keep in mind medication abortion, which is used in 54% of the pregnancies terminated now in the United States. Senate Bill 20 is not going to regulate that. Think of the illegal drug market. Those medications, they will be made, they will be sold, and they will be consumed by women in North Carolina seeking a medication abortion. They will not be regulated by Senate Bill 20, and the risk of dying from medications that are not FDA regulated is high. Fake drugs are not new. It will be an underworld and an unregulated market. For the other 46% of women who have surgical abortions, keep in mind there are only 9 clinics in the state of North Carolina who can provide that care as of now. 11 rural hospitals have closed, and 38 out of 100 counties represented on this House floor tonight have no labor or delivery ward. Healthcare is already not accessible for the poor, especially in the rural parts of this state. And if you think it's hysteria or it's alarmist, you haven't studied history. And if you haven't studied history, you are doomed to repeat it. Increasing the restrictions and enacting legislation that makes it more difficult for women to get the health care they're seeking infringes not only on their health care rights, but on their legal rights to exist as a full citizen and resident in the state of North Carolina. The bill does nothing to reduce unintended pregnancies. All it does is define women as second-class citizens in the state of North Carolina.
For what purpose is the lady from Durham, Representative Moria rise?
To debate the bill.
Ladies recognized to debate the motion.
What we are debating is anything but mainstream. It is extreme. Extreme government control over a woman's most basic private right to make her own health care decision. For 50 years, the U.S. Supreme Court decisions in Roe and Casey, that was the law of the land. Women had constitutional protections guaranteed by the 14th and the 9th Amendments. Individual liberty was made fundamental and free from intrusion into a woman's decision to have an abortion until the 3rd trimester. But last year, an ultra-conservative Supreme Court threw this country into chaos when it decided that each of the 50 states should have an individual control deciding what laws would be over women's bodies. And here we are. It was the central issue in many of our campaigns last year. This isn't just a bill that bans abortion after 12 weeks. It's a denial to women who want to give birth to a healthy baby but medically cannot. We are risking women's lives. We are threatening doctors, nurses, clinicians with legal actions, with disbarment, with penalties from doing their jobs. This law would put reproductive health care at risk for all. It is not political, it is medical. Bans off our bodies. We must sustain this veto.
For what purpose is the lady from New Hanover, Representative Butler rise?
To debate the bill.
Ladies recognized to debate the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Plainly and simply, Senate Bill 20 will make North Carolina a less appealing and less hospitable place to live. There is no doubt that when people choose where they want to live, where they want to raise their families, and where they want to launch their new businesses, they consider many factors And among them is the political climate and a volatile, extremist political agenda that we are seeing here in North Carolina. Well, let's just say it's not a selling point. That's also true of established businesses looking to expand. They want predictability and moderation. Just ask PayPal or Deutsche Bank. North Carolina lost those opportunities and many, many others by virtue of the now infamous and regressive bathroom bill. What a debacle that was. If you consider the economic loss of HB 2 estimated at $500 million a year or so, the fallout from this bill is likely to dwarf that number, because this regressive law will affect every single woman in this state for the entirety of her reproductive life. For most women, that's a sword of Damocles hanging over her head for 30 to 35 years. It is estimated that restrictive and unnecessary burdensome abortion bills like SB 20 cost the American economy well over $100 billion annually, with most of that, of course, falling on the backs of America's women. Because of time lost with repetitive and unnecessary doctor visits and other expensive and invasive procedures. And on a personal level, when a woman is turned away from a wanted abortion, she experiences substantial financial distress. 78% increase in past due debt for women who are turned away, and an 81% increase in public filings related to bankruptcies, evictions, and court judgments. Our United States Supreme Court recognized these negative outcomes for women as they affirmed a women's right to abortion in the Planned Parenthood versus Casey case. In that precedental case, the majority said the ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation has been facilitated by her ability to control her reproductive life. And that Supreme Court's decision is borne out by the research on this issue done by the Brookings Institute and others. The research is unequivocal in its conclusion that access to abortion care does, in fact, profoundly affect women's lives by determining whether, when, and under what circumstances they become mothers. And these determinants, the choices that a woman makes for herself and her family, reverberate throughout her entire life. It affects her marriage patterns, her educational attainment, labor force participation, and her earnings. And perhaps the most important result of restricting access to abortion care for women is that the lack of affordable, available, and safe abortion care, is that it directly and negatively affects subsequent life outcomes for the children themselves. Our fellow North Carolinians know this. They know all of this. And that's why 54% of them oppose this legislation. They know what apparently we don't, and that is this. In a modern society with a constitution that espouses life, liberty, and equal protection under the law, there is no room for draconian measures such as HB 20 that relegate women to second-class citizenship.
For what purpose does the lady from Orange, Representative Price, rise?
To debate the bill.
Ladies recognized to debate the motion.
Okay, first of all, I have my own reasons for supporting the governor's veto of SB 20. Yet this evening, I want to focus first on the arguments of two women whom I respect in support of the reproductive rights of women. Earlier today, House members, all of us, received a letter from a former colleague, now Congresswoman Elma Adams, in which she says, and I'm quoting her, "The abortion legislation before the North Carolina General Assembly today ignores the realities pregnant women face and the maternal health crisis facing American women." She goes on to explain that while some people believe that SB 20 is protecting life with an abortion ban after 12 weeks, many more people understand that abortion protects a woman's freedom, her health, and autonomy in a world that traditionally only valued those concepts for men. Continuing, she says, if we put the ideological debate aside, we are left with a cold fact. American women are dying during or after pregnancy at alarming rates, rates higher than 20 years ago and significantly higher than most wealthy nations. In the United States, approximately 1 in 1,000 black women will die due to pregnancy-related complications. For women with comorbidities and pre-existing conditions, that rate is even higher. And the rate of severe maternal morbidity is even higher than that. Unfortunately, the women who face the most danger from an unexpected pregnancy are often those with the least resources. So multiple visits or trips out of state may be beyond their resources. They may not even know they're pregnant before 8 to 12 weeks, making it impossible for them to clear the hurdles in this legislation. Solving the maternal health crisis and saving the lives of moms should be a higher priority than forcing pregnancy on those most at risk. And those are, that final quote is from Congresswoman Adams. Now I will relate the circumstances of a friend of mine, Heidi, who has given me permission to tell her story. She sent an email, and I'll only read parts of it. I am now 70 years old, long past my childbearing years, but when I needed to make the decision to terminate a pregnancy over 35 years ago, I was fortunate that I lived in North Carolina that supported me in my choice without question. As Heidi shared, I was taking birth control pills, but due to an interaction with another medication I was taking, it failed and I became pregnant. Under normal circumstances, I would not have considered an abortion because A, I was an experienced mother, so the thought of another child did not overwhelm me. B, I loved my partner and would have been thrilled to have a child with him. And C, I had a good job with benefits, so I would not have faced financial hardship. But, and this was a huge but, my partner has scapulohumeral muscular dystrophy, a hereditary disease. His mother and brother also have the disease. FSHD is a dominant genetic disease, meaning that a parent with the FSHD genetic mutation has a 50% chance of passing the disease on to each of their children. So we had to consider the what-ifs of this pregnancy and do some painful soul searching. Genetic testing is generally done around week 15 or 16, but a negative test does not guarantee that the child has not inherited this genetic mutation. So after much discussion and with feedback from the MDA clinic, we decided to terminate the pregnancy. It was a very painful decision for me, as my body had already gone into protective nesting mode, so with many tears and a breaking heart, I scheduled the procedure. And that's the end of her story. But I want to close with my own words. SB 20, in essence, subjugates women and girls with restrictions based on the opinions and biases of politicians, the majority of whom are men. This bill, if enacted, will place shackles on our minds and our bodies. We, women and girls, want our freedom, and we want to be treated as first-class citizens. I therefore ask the members of this chamber to stand with the hundreds of thousands of people in the state and across the nation in defending reproductive rights.
For what purpose does the lady from Forsyth, Representative Baker, rise?
Speak to the bill.
Lady has the floor.
You know, we have heard much from the other side about protecting the rights of children and ensuring that women have safety measures in place when they go to clinics to have abortions. But the truth of the matter is they have never presented any data to support that the systems that was in place before this bill was introduced, that it was somehow harmful to the women who needed to exercise their right to health care. It also is important to note that if you look at any of the data in any of the polling, overwhelmingly, North Carolinians, whether it is a Republican-leaning poll, a Democratic-leaning poll, or a nonpartisan poll, has spoke. And quiet as it's kept, many of you have had private conversations with us about not really wanting to support this bill. But you're fearful that if you speak your truth, that you will somehow not be reelected. I would say to you, I disagree. My colleague said 54% in the poll that she mentioned, North Carolinians support the current rule and the current law. I would say that's over half of our counties. Some have been as high as 70% of North Carolinians who have supported our current regulations and bills governing abortions. That would mean 70 out of the 100 counties that we represent in here support what we currently have in place. I employ my colleagues on the other side. Stand up and speak and represent the people in your district. We cannot afford to take a partisan stand out of fear. Lives are on the line. A woman's pregnancy is a personal issue. They have to make the decision themselves for what that will entail. They don't consult anyone in this room for that, nor should they. Whatever the decision is, ultimately they have to live with that choice. Some have rooted this discussion in morality. Well, let me tell you about morality. Can't be legislated, and most certainly we stand as individuals. We stand firm in what we believe to be right, and ultimately a woman wants to make the decision that is both right for her, her husband, her family, and ultimately it's between her and her doctor. Again, I would employ those of you on the other side who in your heart knows that this is not a good bill and should be vetoed, to be courageous enough to stand with those of us who will stand with the governor, because we trust that when this is all said and done, those of us that are standing on the veto will be on the right side of this issue. And so I just encourage you to be courageous. It just takes one. And know that more people are probably standing with you than the loud noise of the few. Thank you.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Wake, Representative Longest, rise.
To speak to the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
Fellow members of the House, tonight we debate one of the most significant acts this body can undertake, deciding whether to override the governor's veto. In debating this motion, we should be mindful that under our Constitution, it is the governor alone that is elected to represent all North Carolinians statewide. In deciding whether to override his veto, you must decide whether the benefits leadership touts outweigh the objections the governor lays out. You should therefore closely consider the rationale of the governor's veto message. In vetoing SB 20, the governor said the following: "This bill will create dangerous interference with the doctor-patient relationship, leading to harm for pregnant women and their families. With its medically unnecessary obstacles and restrictions, it will make abortion unavailable to many women, particularly those with lower incomes, those who live in rural areas, and those who already have limited access to care." I ask you to consider that second sentence. This bill will create new barriers for all, but in voting to override the veto, you are voting to eliminate access and effectively ban abortion for women who cannot afford it and for women in rural North Carolina. We have spoken at great length this session about healthcare access in rural North Carolina. We have heard about how rural hospitals are closing. 11 rural hospitals have closed in North Carolina since 2005, the third highest number of hospital closures in the nation in this period. We have heard how many in rural North Carolina were denied access because of lack of insurance. In an incredible show of support, we expanded Medicaid on a bipartisan basis because it would expand access to health care in rural North Carolina and save rural hospitals. Protecting rural health care access is a noble goal, but if you vote to override the governor's veto, you would strike at the heart of that goal and harm the health of women across rural North Carolina by putting essential, potentially life-saving health care out of reach. When we were debating SB 20, I asked how women from rural areas would access abortions after 12 weeks when that care is limited to hospitals. The response was, I think there are hospitals in range for most people. But when this body is legislating health care, it must base its decisions on facts. And here are the facts. 26 of North Carolina's counties have no practicing OBGYNs since 2018. 20 counties do not have a hospital, and 38 counties do not have a labor and delivery hospital. According to a 2022 report in the Wilmington Star News, North Carolina has 14 abortion clinics. Those clinics are only in 9 counties, leaving 91 counties without a clinic at all. And that is assuming they stay open, when in reality, the onerous new licensing requirements in this bill will shutter those clinics across the state. But even assuming they stay open, under this bill, those clinics would not be able to administer abortions after 12 weeks at all, even though abortions can be safely administered in outpatient facilities well into the second trimester. As one of our colleagues in the other chamber noted this week, his wife did not even know she was pregnant until 11 weeks. That is true for many women, and many serious abnormalities or complications are not detectable until after 20 weeks of pregnancy. This problem is compounded for women in rural areas. Rural communities disproportionately lack specialist health care, including reproductive health care provided by OBGYNs. The further a woman lives from our metro areas, the less likely she is to get any prenatal care at all in the first 12 weeks. According to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, well over half of American women living in rural communities are further than 30 minutes from a health care provider, and most are at least an hour away. That is even more true in North Carolina. 4 million North Carolinians, 40% of our population, live in rural communities. And in 31 of our counties, the average distance that one must travel to a hospital is 20 miles or more. When you require 3 visits to obtain a medication abortion, when you require a consultation with a physician 72 hours before an abortion to be in person and not remote, when you invent new licensing requirements for abortion facilities that will shutter those clinics even where they do exist, even though women in rural North Carolina disproportionately lack early prenatal care, disproportionately lack access to transportation, and are disproportionately low income and cannot take off work for days to get the health care they need, you are effectively banning abortion for women in rural North Carolina. And because health-related abortions late in pregnancy are only available under this bill for medical emergencies, it would force women in rural areas to wait until they are on death's door, perhaps dying of sepsis, to obtain an abortion. When there are only 3 trauma center hospitals east of Raleigh, that means rural women will be risking their life and possibly dying because of this law. When aspiring doctors take an oath, they promise to first do no harm. Since under this bill, we as legislators are stepping into the role of the doctor, we must first do no harm. But this bill will harm the health of women, and particularly those in rural North Carolina. If you have daughters, granddaughters, family, or constituents living in rural North Carolina, I ask you to think about their health. I ask you to first do no harm, and I ask you to vote against overriding this veto. Thank you.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Buncombe, Representative Riddell, rise.
To speak on the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decision to start a family is a deeply personal one. And when making that decision, people have to think about their health, their finances, and their faith. Just because one is religious doesn't mean that someone is anti-abortion. In fact, ministers around the state came to the General Assembly just this Monday to make exactly that point. North Carolina is a predominantly Christian state, but we also have many different faiths here. Many North Carolinians classify themselves as practicing a religion other than Christianity. Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Zoroastrians. Now, I could talk about my Jewish faith and what they say about abortion, what my faith says. And my rabbi calls himself pro-life because pro-life, according to his interpretation of the Torah, means we should feed the hungry. It means we should give everyone access to quality health care. It means we should house the homeless. But I'm not going to talk about my faith today because this country is founded on the separation of church and state and the free practice of everyone's religious beliefs. If you're a Christian and your faith tells you not to have an abortion, I support your decision not to have an abortion. If you're a Muslim and your faith tells you not to have an abortion, I also support your decision not to have an abortion. But what I don't support is the state interfering with those personal decisions about how and when to start a family. We've talked about keeping politicians out of the doctor's office, and I think we should also keep politicians out of people's relationship with faith in God. The current law allows for people to make their own decisions about their faith and about their family planning, and this law would take that away. I urge my colleagues to vote against this veto override and to vote for freedom of expression of religion, to vote for freedom to make your own decisions about your family, and to vote for freedom. Thank you.
For what purpose the lady from Wake, Representative Sylvania, rise?
To debate the bill.
The lady has the floor.
I want us to actually look at this from a different lens. And actually, I want to springboard off 3 points from both sides of the aisle. The first is, and it's a major theme that we've been discussing all session, is our challenge when it comes to workforce, especially with our healthcare professionals. Obstetricians and gynecologists not only perform abortions. That's not the only thing they do. They provide a wide range of preventative care services, including pap smears, sexual transmitted infection testing, pelvic exams, ultrasounds, blood work, and tests preventative when it comes to identifying and preventing cancer. They are professionals who are highly trained to advise a person's medical decisions about pregnancy, sex, reproductive health care, infertility, and numerous other topics. I want to talk about our medical students, the ones we're trying to actually attract to come here in North Carolina, or keep actually. The Association of American Medical Colleges found states with near total abortion bans, and we're near total, saw a 10.5 decrease when it comes to OBGYN applicants who want to be MDs in their senior year in those states. And those who are already practicing in states that have enforceable abortion bans, or like us, gestational limits, like Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho, Kentucky, Louisiana, and so many other states, are seeing a mass exodus when it comes to their practicing OBGYNs. A lot have expressed that their biggest fear is that being tried as a felon simply for trying to save someone's life. So OBGYNs, if SB 20 makes its way into law, will face suspensions of their medical license, felony charges, and even possibly prison time. These are doctors that we want to keep here to care for our wives, our mothers, our daughters. Please think about that. Point 2, what confounds this also is reporting requirements. This was discussed 2 weeks ago on the floor. It was stated that currently we do statistical summaries going to DHHS, but this bill was stated to say it's going to de-aggregate that information, meaning that it's going to reveal individualized personal data, identifying the most concerning of identifying informations, which includes physicians who provided the abortion, location, dates, and type of abortion, including that healthcare provider's facility, and most disconcerting, the home address of that pregnant lady who might have received that abortion. This is a full violation of patient information protection under the HIPAA Act and federal law, and this will open up immeasurable amounts of civil rights lawsuits against us as a state. So the last point I want to make is actually, we're talking about myths. Why 10 or 11 weeks needs to be changed for mifepristone or misoprostol. Or why we made it 12 weeks. That's actually an arbitrary number of weeks because nothing in science says anything is revealed or developed at 12 weeks' time when it comes to a fetal development of a life. So I'm going to ask you this. And if we worked in this space, we actually would know exactly what this criteria is really made to be and make good reproductive laws. So I'm going to ask you also to imagine this. An OBGYN has a degree in science as an undergrad for 4 years in biology, chemistry, physics. They graduate from college, and then they take a completion of medical school, which is also 4 years. And then they do a residency program for at least another 4 years in length. That's an accreditation under the American Council of Graduate Medical Education. And they go through a rotation of obstetrician, gynecology, oncology, reproductive endocrinology, and ultrasonography, which is how they look at ultrasounds to see if there's a fetal anomaly. And after that, most all OBGYNs get board certified, where they have to go through an online test and then an oral exam 3 years later, I should say, in front of a group of specialized examiners. So I will say this, and they had to go to Dallas to do that, actually. We may have 2 doctors in this house, and I actually do really admire Dr. Reeder and Dr. Baker, but not one of us has the education that I described, the experience or the credentialing to make sound, individualized health decisions whether a person should receive abortion or not. So what makes anyone in this chamber think they have that ability? I ask you that right now. What makes you think you have that ability to make that decision? You'll see a lot of us wearing a pin, have signs up in the gallery here. Politicians make crappy doctors, specifically and particularly OBGYNs. So let's leave these decisions to medical experts and not make it against the law to provide basic health care. Thank you.
For what purpose, gentleman from Mecklenburg, Representative Autry, rise.
To debate the motion.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I'm a Navy veteran, it's 1972 to 76, and I certainly have a lot of esteem for the military mission of this country, and especially here in North Carolina, where we have such a very strong military presence. So it's very important to me that the military has what it needs when it needs it to complete its mission. But SB 20 gives me some concern about how the military is going to be best prepared, because if you're a young person, would you really want to consider enlisting in the service at the prospects that you may be stationed in a state where your reproductive health could be jeopardized? I would certainly have that as a consideration, whether you're a young woman or whether you're a young man with the prospects of a potential family. So I would ask you to support the governor's veto this evening, because bans, as it has been said before by my colleague from New Hanover, bans are bad for business. And we saw that with HB 2. And trust me, as a member of the Charlotte City Council in 2016, I lived HB 2. I don't want to see that happening again here in North Carolina. Please vote to support the governor's veto. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the lady from Guilford, Representative Harrison, rise?
To debate the motion.
Lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise to support the governor's veto, and I don't want to repeat all the articulate remarks that have been made on our side of the aisle about how this is really bad for our state and intrudes on women's ability to access the kind of health care they need, and it's neither good for families nor for women nor for children. So there's a lot about the bill that really bothers me. The part that I focus on the most is the one that's getting a lot of attention nationally, because the states that have enacted these kinds of bans are finding really troubling situations where pregnant women are having complications and aren't getting access to the health care they need. I cited some of these examples when we voted on this bill on May 3rd. But you have a woman who's told to go sit in the parking lot in Oklahoma and get sicker before the hospital's lawyers will let the doctors treat her. We have women in Texas, the one who testified on the Hill, who was told to wait because she wasn't sick enough, and now she nearly died, but she's infertile, and she really wanted to have children. And most of these women really want to have children. Just got a text about another woman in Texas yesterday who developed sepsis because the doctor said he couldn't treat her abortion, he couldn't treat her pregnancy, even though they knew the baby wasn't viable. And it's just very troubling to me that we're going to be going down this path where we know women are going to die. And these are women who want to be pregnant that are facing complications. I wanted to cite 2 examples of situations that were brought up in the Rules Committee that, if you weren't in Rules, that I think are pretty compelling stories about women who would be impacted by this bill if it had been in place. One came from a doctor who is an OBGYN who practices abortion care. And she mentioned her patient who had developed breast cancer. And she was getting treated with chemotherapy. And she was told to stop her birth control because I guess it was an estrogen-positive tumor. And she was told, it also was affecting her periods. So she was getting spotting, but episodic periods. And then she found out, so she was off her birth control, and then she found out she was pregnant. And this is the doctor, so if she had been, if this had happened to her after this bill had passed, she would not have been able to access, because it was after 12 weeks, unless the physician, in his or her judgment, had decided that it was a medical emergency. But we know what's happening in the other states where this is actually law, where the hospitals, the doctors, are deciding that they might get in trouble if they treat these women that are having complications. It's extremely troubling to me. There was another woman who spoke to the committee, a young lady, she's 26, and she's been dealing with bipolar disorder and suicidal ideation. Y'all remember that mental health conditions are exempted from the medical emergency. So this is troubling, because I've heard numerous stories about women who have mental health issues, particularly suicide ideation and depression. And so she is being, the medication she's taking is something called lamotrigine. And it doesn't play well with most hormone-related birth control, so she's not able to take that because that also exacerbates her mood swings. She can't get an IUD because she has a unicornuate uterus, and her only access to birth control is condoms, and we all know that that's not fail-safe. She says she has another disease that's called PCOS that affects 1 in 10 women, where she gets missed periods. So there are times when she goes 12 weeks without a period. So if this bill were enacted, she may be pregnant but not know it because she hadn't had her period, and the pregnancy, because of her health situation, could actually kill her. And I fundamentally believe that we should not be getting in the way of the doctor-patient relationship, because this is where the doctor ought to be able to tell the patient what kind of care they need. And I just am confounded that this body thinks that we are, and I think Representative Serrania said it much better than I am, much more articulately, that these are people who are trained specialists. They know what kind of care their patients need, and this bill is getting in the way of it, and I urge you to support the governor's veto. Thank you.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Wake, Representative Jones, rise?
Speak to the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
I'm going to go into a little history, and I'm going to make my primary point. But how did we get here? We got here because some years ago, just a few years back, a president who didn't win the majority of the votes but won the Electoral College got to appoint 3 justices to the United States Supreme Court. 1, 2, 3. And they changed the precedent that had lasted for 50-some years. That's what happened. That's how we got here. Just wanted to relate back to that history. And I mention that because it's important to know that if you took a poll of the country, I think all the polls say that women want to make up their own minds. That's all they want, a right to make up their own mind about something that is extremely, extremely personal. So I wanted to speak to basically two things in this House right here that's happened on this bill. And it kind of made my head spin. I haven't been here that long. I've been here 2 years and 5 months. And I actually admire this House. I admire this system. I feel very privileged to be here. I really do. God has blessed me, and I'm glad to be here. But I want to speak to this. We have procedures here. I've seen them work. I had to learn them when I got here. I knew how to run a court. I know pretty much about law, but I had to learn this place. And one thing if I have seen nothing else in this place is that almost every bill that comes through here goes through one or two committees. It gets discussed. And not just by us, that's important. Of course, that's important, because we all represent a bunch of people out there. But here's the other part that people may be overlooking. The people come to those committee hearings, and that is the only time that they get to say something. And I've sat in those committee hearings, and I admire the fact that those people get to come and say something pro or con. Well, this bill, for whatever reason, didn't go through that process. And that's bad. When I was a little pup lawyer, I was trained by a very seasoned old judge. And he said, Abe, I'll tell you something. When you get out in the court and people are trying to shut you down, you got to say one magic phrase and you'll get you an appeal. Ask that judge, may I be heard? Your Honor, may I be heard? And he said, sit down, shut up, Jones. That's all you need on the record to get yourself a chance to go to a higher court. I suggest to you that the people out there are saying to us now, may we be heard, pro or con, on this very, very, very significant issue. May we be heard? And the answer from this body is no. And that's sad. That's really sad and it's troubling. They want to be heard in the committees. They always are heard, even on whether put in a section of road and all kinds of stuff. The people get their chance and they come to those mics and they feel strongly. I watch debates up in there and they feel strongly and they say, this is my chance to talk to my representative. This is my shot. And we shut them out. We shut them out this time on something very important. People call me from out of state, said, hey, what's going on down there? I said, I don't know. This is moving like light speed. That's what's in the press. Light speed on something this significant. Why? 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 Why the light speed on this issue? It makes no sense to me. It puzzles me. It's bizarre. Now, the last point I want to make is this. Old guy used to tell me, he said, boy, if you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. You sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. What does that suggest about this issue? When people realize what has been done, and they'll catch on, there are a lot of people out there, and they're going to fight to get back what they had for 51 years. Not You can be pro-life, you can be pro-choice, but the ultimate choice is the woman's choice. And that is being somewhat taken away. At least it's being greatly encroached upon today. So we can sow the wind, but rest assured, the whirlwind's coming. The whirlwind is coming. Thank you.
For what purpose the lady from Cabarrus, Representative Staten Williams, rise?
To speak to the bill.
Lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, while sitting in this chamber, I had a lively conversation with two other freshman members about their life stories. One member shared how impactful it was hearing his mother's life lessons about what it was for him to be a man and how he needed to stand up for women. The other member shared a story about her experience with the foster care system and the impact it had on her client, and that touched me. What I did not share that day with both of them was my own life experience. As much as I deplore public speaking, I really do, I'm standing up today for the folks who want and demand to be heard. In 2002, I was a young mom, very young, in a very committed relationship with my husband. I was working full-time, going to school full-time to be a nurse, raising two amazingly beautiful daughters in church, by the way. They are some amazing girls, and I'm so very proud of them because they are capable of making their own decisions for themselves. In 2002, we discovered we were pregnant. At the time, there was just so much anxiety and angst of trying to really just juggle all the things that we had going on in our lives that needed our time and attention, and particularly mine as a mom and as a student and as an employee. I remember thinking and talking to my husband about just how stressful life was right then, and not being able to really fully carry the weight of everything happening around us and for us at that time. After much consideration, thought, and of course prayer, we decided as a family unit to make the decision to schedule a DNC, and for most of you who are not in the medical field, that is an abortion. We made that decision with our doctor. It was not an easy decision at all. It was not made lightly or frivolously, and it wasn't birth control because I was on birth control. I knew that in order for my family to prosper and to continue with the opportunities that we had in front of us, this was the best decision for us. Not for all of us, for us. While this pregnancy was ultimately unviable, my doctor and I decided to continue on with the procedure because it was in my best interest to have the procedure. He wanted to make sure that I was safe and that I didn't develop any kind of complications from an unviable pregnancy. In the following years, before my son was born in 2006, I went on to graduate from school and began a new career. I had 2 additional unviable pregnancies, both of which required medical procedures and medical intervention. Both. When I read this language of Senate Bill 20, all I see is the removal of the God-given right for myself and folks like me to make decisions for ourselves. That's all I see. The ability to choose what's best for us has been removed for us. I am someone who has grown up in the church, and believes in the power of God. I know that I'll go through trials and tribulations. I know we all will. And I know that ultimately I have been given the freedom of mind to make decisions for myself. If we genuinely believe in the sanctity of life, we need to recognize our medical professionals as the experts that they are. Ultimately, what I needed and what so many other women and folks need in this time are highly trained medical professionals and the freedom to follow their advice. The doctor's office is not, it is absolutely not, because I've worked in the doctor's office, big enough for the entire North Carolina House to fit in it.
For what purpose, the lady from Mecklenburg, resident of Kearney, rise?
To speak to the bill.
Lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you for allowing this discussion, I would like to call it, and think that it's a discussion, but for this opportunity for this body. And I'm thrilled to see that we're all in the chamber and that we're all not wandering out in the halls while people are speaking, because there have been so many powerful points made so far tonight with the speakers prior to me. I really didn't have, as we all say when we do pop up to speak, I really didn't have any intention of speaking today. I spoke on that infamous Wednesday morning when I'm on the Rules Committee. We had a joint Rules Committee meeting called past my bedtime the night before for this bill to be heard. A bill that we'd all been hearing, something's coming on abortion. When is the abortion bill coming? But I can only speak for my side. My side was not in that room, and I heard that morning when I spoke and some others spoke after me in that joint committee meeting from members. Some people made the reference that this is an enormously complex bill, one of the members presenting it. And I thought, wow, I didn't get the bill till I got here that morning. 47 pages. We blink, we're in shock, we're trying to figure out what the language is. We have people on our side, advocates, people calling when it hit the airwaves. What does this bill do? 47 pages. After this House voted that afternoon, and I really started digging in, and then I kept hearing reporters and on TV, and the nation's watching. They were reporting. And people were making points in that bill, and I went, whoa, wait a minute. I voted against that bill, but I had no idea that was in there. I believe that we, all of us, 120 of us in this body, probably could not be drilled today on an exam of every part of this body. But the big part to me that stands out is the title of Senate Bill 20. Women, Children, Care for Women, Children, and Families Act. Well, usually when we have an act up here, it's very involved, it's very complicated, you cover everything. Well, then that infamous morning in Rules, I heard someone say, well, you know, we heard some of the things that you all have said and other people that spoke that morning, but this bill we've been working on since January. And a whole host of compromises have been made. But I don't know about you, but I was taught that politics is the art of compromise from both sides, with both sides. This bill is I don't call names, but this is a GOP act. Care for women, families, and children. Me, my 6 children and their 6 spouses, my 14 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, not was their grandmother or their mother or their mother-in-law sitting in a debate up in that building, and she voted against it. Thank God they wrote back to me, because I could not have voted in all clear conscience for something that was going to drastically affect my family, but mainly the people that I serve. And I serve a district in Charlotte, yes, but I serve the state of North Carolina. We don't take our oath when we're elected, and I was sworn in 2003, proudly took that oath, and was told that the most important thing that I did up here was cast my vote, my own vote. Nobody else can touch that button but me. Nobody can call out my vote but me, but I have to be in my seat. And I take it seriously. And I'm hoping that you take it seriously. I have seen the results of poorly rushed legislation through this body over my 20 years here. And there were consequences that came back. I've seen us have to come back and redo bills that were passed up here in all good faith, but not much debate went on. This bill, I'm astounded by it, and I'm holding the rules book because I at first wasn't going to speak, and I thought, well, I think I'll just have to stand up and say something about, and maybe I looked for it, Rule 8, which is a question of privilege. So I could have used that when I started reading it and just talked about this process. But when I read it, and what you're allowed to do as a member, and it takes precedent over any other motion on the floor when you make that. As a member, we all have that right. It's our rules. But when I read what that would allow me to do, I would be able to speak for up to 3 minutes. Questions of privilege by those attending, first, can only be made addressing the rights of the House collectively, its safety, dignity, and the integrity of its proceedings. Secondly, the rights, reputation, and conduct of members individually. I was reading those words and I thought, when I look at words like rights of the House collectively, this bill wasn't done with the rights of all people in this body collectively being heard. I thought that, and this is my feeling, my opinion, and in my gut, I know I'm right, but my family tells me that. But I saw other words, the safety, dignity, and the integrity of these proceedings. So if I had just done that and stood up, I couldn't talk about it and compare it to the bill. I couldn't say a word. Well, to me, my safety, my dignity, and the integrity of these proceedings has been violated. That's the way I feel. That's the way I feel. I don't feel right when I hear you all saying, or anyone saying, that this was a compromise. And I applaud you, the other side, we say, but the other majority party here. I applaud you for making compromises within your own party. I applaud you for that. I just wish that we were going to be debating this today, where there was a great compromise over a complicated, historic decision of magnanimous magnitude that's going to affect every citizen in the state. Women, Care for Women, Children, Families, and Children Act. And yet, again, we are standing here pleading. I'm sorry that we couldn't hear from people in the state coming to this building, committee after committee, emailing us, but giving us their stories. And again, you've heard some great ones here. You heard some if you were in rules that day. And you heard some the day the bill was passed here. My regret is that this is not a compromise bill by all the members of the House of Representatives. I ask you to dig down, think deep. There is no shame in voting for this, to uphold the governor's veto. There's no shame in that, because what you turn around and say is, I need more time. You know, I really thought I was ready to vote for this, but I need more time. I'm asking you to just think about it in our few minutes we have left in this debate. Thank you.
For what purpose, the lady from Guilford, Representative Clemens, rise.
To debate the motion.
The lady has the floor.
This morning, I got my 3 children ready for school, like I do every morning, and I braided my daughter's hair because she had picture day. And I took the boys to school, and she got in carpool like she does every morning. And I sat down at my kitchen table and cried because I knew I would be coming today to vote on a bill that will make her less safe and more likely to deal with trauma than she would if we did not override this veto tonight. And I feel helpless as a mother, which is a whole different level than I have felt in some of the other bills that have caused me angst as a legislator. My daughter will be 12 in about 3 weeks, and we're planning her birthday parties where she's trying to navigate friend groups. But before long, she'll be 15 and 16. And I am so worried about her and the high likelihood that the parts of this bill dealing with rape could be her life, because 1 in 5 women, 1 in 5, are raped in the United States. If this bill were not to go into law, if she were 16 and had sat with that experience and came to me scared, wanting to know what to do, my job would not be to say, Letty, this is what I think you should do. Because it wouldn't be my decision. It would be hers. If this was not overridden, she could call from her phone with her pink phone case and sticker and do an appointment over the phone, and 72 hours later, go and get medicine and go home and be able to make that choice herself. If this bill becomes law, my scared 16 or 17 or 18-year-old would go to talk to a physician, have to look at an ultrasound, be told risks of an abortion pill that is one of the safest medical procedures we have. My scared 16-year-old would have to be given notice that she could see the remains of her unborn child. Then she'd have to sit with all of that for 72 hours. And I picture her in her room, surrounded by her posters, sitting with that. Then she'd have to go back to the doctor to actually get the medicine. And even then, she couldn't move on. She'd have to come back 7 to 14 days later, being re-traumatized over and over again, as if the initial trauma of rape were not enough. Would she and her friends know that the data about the woman's county, state, age, race, number of births, whether they do their appointment has to be reported to DHHS, and would that scare them from getting the help that they need? What if she was so scared that she didn't tell me until she was 14 weeks pregnant? If I noticed she started wearing baggy clothes and I didn't know why because she was afraid, then we'd add that she'd have to go to a hospital in this bill. Or what if she is pregnant with a very wanted baby, and she's told that that baby won't make it? With this bill, she would now have to sit as if looking at the nursery she'd already decorated wouldn't be enough. She would have to sit and listen to a referral for neonatal and palliative care to discuss options for, well, it was likely a stillborn, but sometimes results in live births. We would be taking my traumatized daughter, feeling the worst feeling of her life, and making it worse. Many people in my caucus had planned to speak tonight. I was not one of them. But I want Letty, I want your daughters, I want your daughters and granddaughters to know that there are many of us who do not want to make their lives harder or worse. And I hope she'll know that when given the chance, I spoke up for her. I hope you'll vote no.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Cumberland, Representative Lucas, rise.
To speak to the motion.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to really address, in my opinion, the integrity of this institution as it relates to this bill. When we talk about families, women, and children, you know, we all were elected through a political process. But it seems to me, on the personal basis, and I hope it's personal with you too, that once you were elected, that you took an oath, and that oath should transcend politics. That oath means that you are now serving, and that you are to serve this great state. I hope that we are serving this state in a manner that's reflective of the desires of your constituency and not your personal desires. It's rare that I get this kind of emotion as it relates to this institution, but I feel very strongly about it. I love this institution, and I've come to love it even more for the last few weeks when I was not able to attend. I learned to appreciate the friendships here. I've learned to really respect the congeniality of the institution, and I would love to see this institution continue to be one that makes me proud. I'm proud whenever I feel that legislation reflects the will of the people. Maybe it's because I was not here, but I did not have privy to the development of this bill. Maybe it's personal with me. I don't know. I've heard some other colleagues say that they didn't either. I do know that there was compromise, and I'm sure that there was compromise, but I would tend to feel that it may have been intrinsic with a certain group. Please let's continue to really respect this institution, and I know that you do, and let's continue to have our respect reach the level that we keep the people of the state of North Carolina in mind. We're professional doctors. You've heard the qualifications and the training for many obstetricians and those who are really trained to know about professional care for women. I wish we would respect that. Not do bills for whatever, maybe it's political expediency, and maybe that's on my part. But I think that's dangerous territory to tread. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose away from Wake, Representative Von Hafen rise.
To debate the motion.
The lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I wanted to start by thanking all of my colleagues for their really important remarks tonight, especially Representative Staten-Williams and Representative Clemens. I absolutely hate that women have to stand up and bare their souls to defend the right over their own decisions. We should not have to do this, but I want to profoundly thank them for sharing, for baring their souls, really, to defend the rights of women in this state. So thank you. As a mom of a 16-year-old daughter that you just talked about, I hope that my daughter never has to go through what you just talked about, and I hope your daughter never has to. And I hope nobody's daughter ever has to. But unfortunately, if this bill passes tonight, they will. And that's why I think everyone is very emotional tonight about what's happening. 42 hours. This bill was rushed through the House and the Senate in 42 hours. From 11 p.m. on May 2nd, when this bill was released to the public, to 5 p.m. on May 4th, when the Senate made their final vote. 42 hours elapsed. The irony of this is not lost on anyone, that this is far less than the 72 hours that this bill requires that women wait before we trust them to decide if they want to seek an abortion. Now we are here at 8:30 p.m. in the dark of night to override a veto that just happened on Saturday. We're at the very first legislative day and the very first opportunity to do so. It certainly feels to many people in this chamber and watching tonight that this bill is being rushed through because members know that this devastating ban on abortion is deeply unpopular. You've already heard from many others tonight about how this bill will hurt women in our state, how it will hurt business, how it will hurt families, how it will hurt women coming here from other states to seek health care. So why? Why are we doing this? Why are you so determined to subvert the popular will of our state? Why do you care so much about what I choose for my own life and on my own body? Why do you so profoundly distrust the women of our state? Aren't you sure that we shouldn't sleep on it at least? Ought we not to require that the full text of this bill be read to us by a doctor and then schedule another session in 72 hours to vote so we can think about it? How can you trust the women of this body today to vote this quickly when you don't trust us to make decisions about our own bodies? We talk a lot in this building and in this chamber about freedom and choices. I hear all the time that we need to have the choice where to send our kids to school. We need to have the freedom to carry and own a gun. But when it comes to women and their freedom and their choices, all those concepts seem to disappear. That's because abortion bans are really about control. The ability to control the lives and the choices of others. And Senate Bill 20 is the perfect example of one group controlling the lives, the health, and the future of women in our state. That's why so many people tonight are here in opposition. That's why over 2,000 people showed up on Saturday to watch the veto of this bill. Because we do not want to be controlled. Women did not ask for your oversight. We didn't ask for your approval. We didn't ask for your supervision. It's our fundamental right to make decisions about our own bodies and our own health care, and this bill is a violation of those rights. The government should never force a person to carry a pregnancy or give birth against their will. It's fundamental. North Carolina women do not need to be protected. North Carolina women can make their own decisions, and we do not need politicians to do it for us. That's why I stand with the majority of North Carolinians tonight who say, stay out of our exam rooms and stay out of our healthcare decisions.
Members, I had a conversation with the House Minority Leader that I intended to allow Representative Baker to have the final word as one of the bill sponsors on this bill. So are there any other members before the chair recognizes Representative Baker that wish to be recognized? Because once Representative Baker speaks, we will move to a vote. Are there any other members who wish to debate the bill at this time? Seeing none, for the final debate on the bill, the lady from Cabarrus, Representative Baker, is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, during the course of these intense discussions, both here and outside this chamber, there has been one statement that has been repeated, and it needs to be addressed. And that statement is that politicians make poor physicians. So I want to be clear. As I stand before you tonight, I stand as a woman, I stand as a mother, I stand as a physician. And as a physician, I took an oath. That oath is a duty. It is a duty to first do no harm, and it is a duty to protect each and every life. Each and every life. That is exactly what Senate Bill 20 does. And that is exactly why the only two physicians in the entire North Carolina General Assembly are supporting Senate Bill 20. We voted yes on this bill, and we will vote to override the veto. Senate Bill 20 makes medical sense, and Senate Bill 20 is common sense. It balances protecting the life of the unborn child. It balances that with a woman's need for life-saving care. And importantly, it protects the integrity of the doctor-patient relationship. It protects the...
Audience members should either stay silent or leave. The lady continues to have the floor.
So I will repeat that statement. This bill protects the integrity of the doctor-patient relationship. This bill represents consensus position of North Carolina's citizens, the vast majority of whom support limitations to abortion after 12 weeks. And extremely importantly, this bill provides resources for the pregnant woman. It provides broad resources and a significant knowledge base to enable her, to equip her in finding a path forward for her, and a path forward for her unborn child. As a woman, as a mother, as a physician, and as a legislator, I am proud to support Senate Bill 20 with a vote to override the veto, and I urge you to join me in doing so. Thank you.
The question before the House is the motion that Senate Bill 20 become law, notwithstanding the objections of the governor. All those in favor will vote aye. All of those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. With 72 having voted in the affirmative and 48 in the negative, the motion carries. Having passed by the requisite 3/5 vote, the House has overridden the governor's veto and the bill becomes law, notwithstanding the governor's objections. So be notified. The gentleman from Caldwell, actually just a moment. The sergeant at arms will clear those who can't follow the rules. Members, for your planning purposes, tomorrow's session will probably be a little less interesting and will be at 1 p.m. We will have votes at 1 o'clock tomorrow. There are a number of bills that are in committee. We'll get a calendar out tonight. We'll confer with the minority leader and the majority leader in the morning on the exact bills. But there will be bills added. But tomorrow's session will be at 1 p.m. It will be a voting session. Based upon the fact that we've had votes today on Tuesday, it does not appear that we will need votes on Thursday of this week. So it looks like we will be able to conclude our business for this week tomorrow. So with that, any brief notices or announcements? Gentleman from Union, Representative Brody, recognized for an announcement.
For announcement. Members, the House Local Government Planning and Development will meet at 11 o'clock tomorrow on 423.
See, for what purpose? Gentleman from Iredale, Representative McNeely, rise.
Speak to an event we're having tomorrow.
Gentleman's recognized.
The House Ag Committee, we're taking a tour of the NC State Vet School. Quite a few of you have already signed up, but if others would like to come, please contact my office and let us know as soon as possible so we can plan for you. It's from 10 to 12 out at the North Carolina Vet School, which is off of Interstate 40 or Wade Avenue, I should say.
For what purpose? Gentleman from Beaufort, Representative Kidwell, rise.
For an announcement,
Gentleman has the floor.
North Carolina House Freedom Caucus will meet tomorrow, 12 noon, 1425. Pizza will be available.
Any further notices or announcements? For what purpose? Delay from wait. Representative Dahl, rise.
I would like to ask if we're having a rules committee tomorrow. Okay.
Doesn't appear that there will be. So it looks like, I know there's a couple of bills that'll be on. We should have those on the I think we'll be able to get those on the calendar tonight, so they'll show up tomorrow on those. For what purpose? Gentleman from Durham, Representative Hawkins, rise.
Point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I was hoping to do this before the festivities of tonight. But like everyone, we leave the General Assembly from our families. We come here from our families and sacrifice time. And so I know he's asleep now, and he had a chance to have a little party at his school. But I want to wish my youngest son, Adam, a happy 7th birthday. And so he is the sweetest little boy to know, but I look forward to getting to him tonight. And I would also like to mention that there are many members of the IDD caucus that will visit Tammy Lynn Center, TLC, tomorrow morning. Executive Director is in our body and will host us tomorrow at 8 a.m. So if you're interested, please email us, and we'd glad to have you. Thank you.
Any further notices or announcements? Seeing none, the gentleman from Caldwell, Representative Hall, is recognized for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now adjourn to reconvene Wednesday, May 17th at 1 p.m. subject to the standard stipulations set forth in Rule 15.1.
Representative Hall moves, seconded by Representative Kidwell, that the House do now adjourn to reconvene Wednesday, May 17th at 1 p.m. subject to the standard stipulations set forth in Rule 15.1. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the House stands adjourned.